On the 8th of February 1943, a young 17-year-old girl who had been tortured by the German army of the Second World War was taken out of her prison cell and led into a clearing in a village close to where she had grown up. She was forced up onto a stool as an executioner took out a noose and wrapped it around her neck. He passed this rope over the tree and then gave the teenager a choice. It was either give information to the German soldiers about resistance groups in the local area, or to face her immediate execution and death. And Lepa Radic chose to go to her death, kicking and fighting and calling local people to ignore the occupation of their homeland and to fight the German army. But this resulted in her execution, one of the most brutal of the Second World War, and it showed how the German army would execute anyone who they believed would be fighting against them. But Lepa Radic's story is one which is surrounded in courage, determination, and a strong belief to rid her homelands of the evils of the Nazis. Lepa Radic was born inside of the village of Gasnica, close to Gradiška, on the 19th of December 1925, and her family were Bosnian Serb. She had a normal childhood for a girl living inside of these lands, and she attended a local school and by all accounts was destined for a successful life, as she was known for her intelligence and her brain. Her family schooled her at home in the communist beliefs, and her uncle in particular influenced her own political standing. And Lepa was very ahead of her friends. She would spend most of her time reading books, many of which had a political undertone, and at the age of 15, she then joined what was known as the League of Communist Youth of Yugoslavia. This was a youth group set up for those people who supported communism, and the group would get involved in different activities and would organise different small gatherings. But the Second World War brought a huge amount of upheaval and chaos to the life of Lepa Radic, and with this she made a number of decisions that would change her life. She was not afraid to stand up against what she believed was evil, and these decisions would lead to her execution. The Second World War, which erupted across Europe, began it's accepted by most historians when Hitler invaded Poland on the 1st of September 1939, and he quickly conquered and then occupied the nation. Inside of these lands, his army caused chaos, and there were groups of death squads who rounded up civilians and then carried out brutal executions. And many of these war crimes are yet to have been discovered, with victims lying in mass graves still to this day, 85 years later. But in 1941, 2 years after the conflict had begun, Hitler turned his attention to the East, and in particular the Soviet Union. He had in this time taken France and pushed the British and Allies back to the beaches of Dunkirk, and Hitler wanted to go east. He had before signed an agreement with the Soviet dictator Joseph Stalin that it was believed would bring a ceasefire between Nazi Germany and the Soviets for a period of 10 years. Hitler wanted to move German people into the lands to the east, but he then launched his invasion of the Soviet Union, and this became the largest military invasion and operation in human history. But in the lands of Yugoslavia, where Lepa Radic was living, there was a number of issues for the Nazi dictator. He wanted to annex the land into his empire, but the Yugoslavians had been collaborating with the British, and they passed important information between each other. However, they later then signed an agreement with Hitler's allies, despite the fact the kingdom had tried to remain as neutral as it could. Yugoslavia was the site of a military coup, and this led to King Peter II being made the king and head of the government, and he was only 17 and was seen as someone who the Nazis could control. Hitler used this as a reason to invade, and he said that the new establishment was being propped up by the British, and he then saw the land as one of his enemies. But in 11 days of brutal and bloody fighting, Yugoslavia capitulated, and with this the country was partitioned. The Nazis established the independent state of Croatia, and Lepa Radic's homelands became annexed into this. But there was much more horror to come, as the Nazis allowed the terrifying Ustaše to come to power and impose a sense of security over the nation. This group had a number of ruthless policies, and they wanted to slaughter 1/3 of all Serbian people, deport another third, and then convert the remaining to become Catholics. With this, the group carried out terrifying public executions, and they had many different crimes. Because of this, many people who felt threatened joined resistance groups, and this included Lepa Radic, who hated and feared living in the regime, and she did not want to willingly continue living under it. People joined the Partisans, who are considered one of the war's most successful resistance groups, and Lepa did this moving to the mountain regions near her hometown, and she met with others including her father and uncle. But the Partisans did allow young girls to join the group, and they were seen as a valuable asset, and Lepa herself was someone who was celebrated inside of the group. She, alongside her sister Dora, joined, and they lived dangerously inside of the partisan camps, and they knew that if there were raids on the camps by the German soldiers, that they would be arrested and subjected to at least terrifying torture. Specifically, Lepa joined the 7th Partisans Company, and she was given a number of different jobs, including to recruit teenagers and other young people to the cause. She visited different villages and settlements without arousing suspicion, and would try to rally local people to join the partisans in the mountains and to carry out attacks on German soldiers. She was also given command of a number of raiding groups, using other teenagers to steal grain and resources for the resistors. She was successful with this, and Lepa also served as a nurse, and she was ordered to help heal wounded soldiers who had committed attacks against the Germans, and she was also a successful evacuator of injured men from the battlefield. But she continued to resist, and she knew that despite being just a teenager, she could be executed for her crimes. The Germans saw women on the battlefield as evil, and they hated the fact that Soviets also used female soldiers. Partisans themselves were found by the German army and taken alive, were subjected to terrifying and rough treatment, and if they did not give over information under torture, then they would be executed. They knew the German army were ruthless with this, and Lepa Radic remained fighting the Germans. In January of 1943, the Germans conducted a number of assaults against the partisans in the region, and huge battles erupted, including the Battle of Neretova. Lepa was there, and she, during this, evacuated many wounded partisan men from the battlefields under fire, and she managed to get them back to the hospital. She also helped to rescue others in nearby regions, and she was seen as heroic, regularly risking her life under heavy fire. She continued to evacuate partisans and others, but in February of 1943, Lepa Radic met her match in the elite SS mountain divisions, who were sent in to deal with the partisans once and for all. She was caught up fighting these skilled soldiers who were considered some of the most ardent of Nazi soldiers, and also soldiers who were adept with fighting in the terrain occupied by the partisans. During one skirmish, Lepa Radic tried to save 100 women and children who were caught up in the fighting, and she did help many to escape, but facing the SS enemy, she refused to go down willingly. The SS division moved up to her position, and she then grabbed her gun that she had been given, and she fired this weapon at the enemy and emptied her weapon at the German forces. But the SS then quickly overwhelmed her and captured her, taking the teenage girl into captivity. Inside of the local Nazi prison, Lepa Radic was subjected to brutal torture, and she was beaten despite being just 17 years old. The Germans wanted to find out more about the partisans in the local area, but Lepa had no intention to speak to her enemies, and she did not give them anything that they wanted. Because of this, she was sentenced to death, but would be given a few more final opportunities to give over information, even in her final minutes. On the 8th of February, 1943, Lepa Radic was taken out to her execution. She was led out by German soldiers. There were no organised execution structures made, and the Germans found a tree which would be strong enough to hold this young girl's weight. They placed a box underneath this, and an executioner passed a rope and tied a noose around the tree. Lepa was led out to the noose, and she was then forced to stand on the box. She was asked one final time to give over information about the partisans, but she refused to do this and shouted to the people who had been forced to witness her execution that, "Long live the Communist Party and partisans! Fight, people, for your freedom! Do not surrender to the evildoers! I will be killed, but there are those who will avenge me." She then asked for the final time for information and stated, "I am not a traitor of my people. Those whom you are asking about will reveal themselves when they have succeeded in wiping out all you evildoers to the last man." The German executioner had had enough, and he then tied the noose tighter around her neck and kicked out the box which she was stood on. And in front of the large crowd, the 17-year-old girl was executed by slowly strangling to death. No one who was gathered ran up to help her, as they knew they would be shot by the German guards who were stood next to her. Lepa Radic is remembered as a brave young woman who fought the Germans valiantly and bravely, and she refused to give over any information about the actions of her resistance group. But she faced the ultimate punishment for her actions, and despite being just a teenager, she was executed at the hands of the German army. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe. And again, thank you for watching.